Friday the 13th. Jason Lives. Chapter 1. Life is just something that happens to you while you're busy making other plans. The phrase ran bitterly through Tommy Jarvis's mind. John Lennon had written it that way, but Tommy figured that if the word death was exchanged for life, it worked even better. Death is just something that happens to you while you're busy making other plans. Yeah, that's where it's at, all right. As much as he hated to correct John Lennon, the world was beat or being beaten, eat or be eaten. That was the savage bottom line, the hard and brutal truth of existence. His battered Ford pickup truck roared around a bend in the road, spinning crazily onward, its headlights suddenly spotlighting a graphic slice of life, a scene specially staged to match his frenzied, morbid thoughts. Frozen in the glaring headlights like a picture snapped by a deranged photographer was the image of a mangy dog standing in the center of the road, its dripping muzzle lifted from the exploded carcass of a rabbit recently run over by a passing car. The rabbit had simply tried to cross the road, and death had come screaming down out of the darkness in the form of several tons of speeding automotive steel. The tiny animal was paralyzed with fear for a split second, then smashed flat, its body bursting like a paper bag full of raw hamburger meat. The machine shot on into the night, leaving behind it a bloody mass of pulped meat and ruptured entrails. Death had come along and changed that rabbit's plans, and now another of God's abandoned creatures, a starving and emaciated dog that was only trying to survive, had come to feed upon the grisly carcass. Its eyes were lambent in the headlights for a moment as it froze, staring at the truck barreling down upon it. And as Tommy swerved, the terrified animal fled into the woods, having barely missed sharing the rabbit's ugly fate. It's just a cycle, Tommy Jarvis thought. Just a lousy, endless fucking cycle that never gives anyone or anything a goddamn chance. Life doesn't just wear you down, it pounds you relentlessly into the ground and smashes you flat into a bloody pulp. The pickup truck struck a pothole and swerved toward the right side of the road. Tommy blinked, jerking back the wheel and getting back on course, taking a deep breath and letting it out slowly. He gripped the steering wheel tightly to stop his hands from shaking. Man, get a hold of yourself, he thought. That was really sick. Maintain. If you keep thinking about things like that, they'll slam you right back in the cage, inside that soundproof padded cell where no one can hear you scream. And you just can't go back there, boy, not ever. Not again. Some things are worse than death. Besides, you've got a job to do. Unfinished business. He glanced down briefly at the hockey mask that Alan Hawes was holding in his hands, almost surprised to remember that he had a passenger on this hellish ride. "I don't know how the hell you talked me into this, Jarvis," Alan Hawes said, his southern voice betraying a hard and desperate edge. He was a few years older than Tommy Jarvis, in his mid-20s, and he was sitting tensely in the passenger seat, his body rigid, his teeth clamped down on a cheap cigar. He was chewing on it as if it were a pacifier, working it around in his mouth with nervous energy. Hawes was spooked. The whole thing was getting to him. He couldn't seem to adjust to being out. He had spent most of his life in psychiatric institutions, and he felt unprotected in the outside world. He was gripping the hockey mask so tightly that if it had been made of anything else but that tough, resilient plastic, his white-knuckled fingers would have punched right through it. They were driving relentlessly through the night, as if there was some giant magnet at the other end of the road, pulling their truck inexorably toward it. Yeah, that's exactly what it's like, thought Tommy. He felt as though there was something incredibly powerful, invisible, some kind of force tugging on him. There was no fighting it. It was pulling him through the night while thunder crashed all around them, like the beating of a giant kettle drum. Tommy stared at the road without focusing, thinking only of the drums the Roman galley masters used in those old adventure movies like Ben-Hur. The drum pounded out the rowing cadence for the slaves chained to the oars, doomed to live the remainder of their miserable lives in the darkness of the lower decks, rowing until their hearts burst. "Jarvis! Jarvis!" Tommy blinked and shook his head. Maintain. Maintain. I'm okay, man." "Hell, I must be crazy," Hawes said, looking back out through the windshield. If the old institution ever found out about this, boy, they'd throw our butts back in and straitjacket 'em permanent." "You didn't have to come, Hawes," Tommy said, clenching his teeth. He didn't need to be reminded about that place, and Hawes continually reminded him. Obviously, Alan couldn't believe that they were out, so he kept reminding himself that all of this was real and not just another crazy hallucination. Yeah, it's real, man, Tommy thought, and it's about to get a lot more real. He stared out into the darkness ahead of them, a look of grim determination set on his face. "This is between me and Jason." "Yeah, I know, but I still don't get the therapy here," said Hawes uncertainly, as if he didn't really know why Tommy was doing this. Tommy guessed he didn't, but then again, how could he? Even though they had talked about it endlessly, talking about it could never begin to compare to living it. Hawes was only trying to get a handle on reality so he could find a way to deal with it. That's all any of us can really do, thought Tommy. Try to maintain. Try to get a handle on it. The trouble is that my handle's slick with blood and I have to squeeze that fucker with everything I've got or I'll lose my damn grip. And it's a long, long fall over the edge. "All you need to know is Jason's dead, right?" said Hawes. "Seeing his corpse ain't gonna stop your hallucinations." "Seeing it won't," said Tommy. "But destroying him, once and for all, will." He shot Hawes a savage look. "Jason belongs in hell. I'm gonna see he gets there." Hawes swallowed hard as he watched Tommy Jarvis drive. We might beat this Jason character there if Tommy keeps on driving like this, he thought. He chewed nervously on the cigar and turned to glance out the back window into the bed of the pickup truck. Lightning flashed briefly, illuminating the rusty pickup bed, which contained a large 10-gallon can of gasoline, a crowbar, and a couple of shovels. It was all bouncing around back there, and Hawes wondered what would happen if the can of gasoline broke open. Thunder rumbled, and he turned back to look through the windshield again, though he still saw the afterimage of the can of gasoline, the crowbar, and the shovels. Especially the shovels. He remembered helping Tommy put them back there, but it was as if he hadn't fully realized what they were going to use those shovels for. It was as if someone else had done it. We had nothing to do with that, he thought, his easily confused mind having difficulty grasping the ugly truth of what they were about to do. We didn't put those things back there, he thought, so none of this was really happening. It had to be a dream. Any minute now he was going to wake up and find himself back on the ward. The attendants would be coming around soon with their little trays of tranquilizer pills, Thorazine, Mellaril, Haldol, Stelazine. He'd taken them all at one time or another. They were his old friends, the only friends he'd ever really had, except for Tommy. This is really crazy, he thought, really crazy. It was like being in some kind of horror movie with two grave robbers on their way to desecrate the monster's final resting place. It wasn't real. Real people didn't do things like this. Neither did sane people, but they weren't exactly sane, were they? That's what everyone said about us when they put us in that place, thought Hawes, that we're not sane, not fit to mingle with the normal folk. No, gotta lock them up along with all the other crazies where they'll be safe, where they can't hurt themselves or anybody else. Only we're not safe anymore, thought Hawes. We're out. God damn, we're really out. But if they catch us pulling this crazy stunt, they'll lock us right back up again. And this time they might never let us out. Lightning split through the rolling black clouds, lighting up the old cemetery gates ahead of them. The sign above the gates said, "Eternal Rest Cemetery." Tommy pulled in as the thunder rumbled loudly. Hawes was not sure if he was more frightened of the storm or of what they were about to do. This is it, he thought. We're driving through the gates of hell. What in God's name am I doing here? Tommy Jarvis was his friend. That's what he was doing there. You did things for your friends, things you wouldn't ordinarily do because your friends needed them to be done, and you had to help your friends. Having a friend meant everything to Alan Hawes because he never had one before. Even whenever he was a kid, nobody had wanted anything to do with him. He had been different, strange, excitable. At first, the other kids had just looked at him funny, then they started teasing and mocking him. Then they started beating him up. And then they just left him alone, as if sensing on some subliminal level that being alone was by far the worst form of punishment. It didn't change things much when they locked him up inside one ugly institution after another. Being locked out of the real world was nothing new for Alan Hawes. He'd been locked out as far back as he could remember. But Tommy hadn't locked him out. Tommy hadn't tried to hurt him. Tommy was his friend. You do things for your friends. Tommy slammed the brakes on, and the truck skidded to a halt. He turned the engine off. There was a look of fierce, grim determination on his face. This was it. This was what they had been talking about for months. God, thought Hawes, we're gonna do it. We're really going to do it. Tommy opened the door, got out, and walked around to the back of the truck. Hawes didn't move. I don't want to do this, he thought. Man, I really don't want to do this. Tommy, please don't make me. But he could not say it out loud. He didn't want to lose the only friend he had. Tommy started to unload the pickup. Hawes took a deep breath and stared down at the hockey mask he was squeezing in his hands. What the hell kind of person walks around wearing one of these things, he thought. What the hell kind of person does the kind of things Tommy told him Jason had done? And what the hell kind of person keeps a mask like this, knowing who or what had worn it? He got out of the truck, and Tommy handed him the gas can and the tools. Then Tommy took the lantern they had brought, looked at Hawes, nodded as if to say, "Okay, let's do it, and get it over with," and carrying the lantern started walking down between the rows of tombstones. Hawes followed, afraid, not knowing what else to do. The storm was very close now. Thunder was crashing all around them. The wind pulled at their clothes. Tommy was walking slowly along the rows of tombstones, carefully examining each one, holding the lantern up and reading the inscriptions, then moving on. He was looking for one tombstone in particular, the one tombstone Hawes suddenly wished they would never find. And it seemed for a while that they wouldn't find it. They kept on looking. Tommy was getting frustrated, his movements jerky and impatient as he dashed from one gravestone to another. He was really wired. We're not going to find it, Hawes thought suddenly, with relief. It isn't here. Tommy was imagining it all. This was just another one of his friend's hallucinations, the visions that had tortured him so much. Alan Hawes knew all about hallucinations. It isn't here, thought Hawes, and Tommy will see for himself that it's not here, and he'll realize that none of this was real, and he'll feel better, and then we'll just get out of here and leave this all behind us, and we'll never talk about it again. And then Tommy stopped, standing very still, bent down over a grave. No, thought Hawes, it isn't there. I don't want it to be there. He moved closer, looking at the inscription on the tombstone, illuminated by the lantern. Jason Voorhees, at rest. Oh shit, thought Hawes. Tommy was staring at the tombstone, his eyes wide. A strange light seemed to dance within them. He moved the lantern and looked at the tombstone beside it. The inscription read, Pamela Voorhees' beloved mother. Tommy looked back at Hawes and pointed down at Jason's grave. This was the one. Yeah, Hawes thought, with the sinking feeling. Yeah, I know. He gulped and nodded. You do things for your friends. He took a deep breath. Okay, he said, determined to give it one last try. There he is. He's dead all right. Let's go. I gotta be sure, said Tommy. They put down the lantern and the gas can and the crowbar, and then picked up the shovels. Hawes stood looking down at the shovel in his hands, as if he suddenly didn't know what it was or why it was used. Tommy didn't hesitate. He plunged his shovel deep into the ground, forcing it further into the mound of soil with his foot, and then removed a large chunk of grass and dirt. Grave robbers, Hawes thought. That's what we are. We're grave robbers, ghouls. We're going to be damned. We're going to burn in hell. He shut his eyes for a moment, then bent down to the task. The dirt flew as they worked feverishly. God, thought Hawes, what if somebody catches us at this? Doesn't cemeteries have groundskeepers or something? Caretakers or night watchmen or something? Can't we get arrested for doing this? What kind of person gets a job like that? He almost burst out laughing with hysterics. What kind of person gets a job like that? Did he really think that? Christ, he thought, what the hell kind of person does what we are doing. It'll be alright, he told himself. It won't really be so bad. We'll dig the goddamn coffin up and Tommy will see that this Jason character is really dead and there won't be any need to go through with the rest of it, with the gasoline. Jesus, what's the body gonna look like? How long has he been dead? It's okay, Hawes thought, trying to reassure himself. It's okay. It's gonna be alright. I'm not gonna let this freak me out. I've seen dead animals before. This ain't no different. There's nothing here to scare you. It's just rotten meat, that's all. Dead meat. Tommy's shovel struck something hard. For a second, Tommy hesitated. Then he redoubled his efforts, working twice as hard as before, throwing shovelfuls of dirt up out of the grave, exposing the coffin's lid. Jesus, Hawes thought. He thought of an old movie he had seen on late-night television once. The show with that sexy lady in the black dress that was so tight it looked like it was painted on her skin. It was an old picture called The Mummy. The archaeologists were opening up the mummy's tomb, and this old Egyptian guy was warning them about the curse. They didn't pay any attention, and they started to open up the tomb. And then the movie stopped suddenly, and the camera cut back to the sexy lady lying on her velvet couch back in the studio, and she said, "Don't do it. You'll be sorry." And then it cut back to the movie, and they opened up the tomb. Tommy was scraping the dirt off the coffin's lid. He tossed the shovel up out of the grave, and it landed in the pile of dirt they had dug up. He looked up at Hawes and reached out his hand. Hawes silently handed him the crowbar. Tommy took the crowbar and reversed it so that the flat side was facing down. Then he drove it into the side of the coffin lid, forcing it in, straining hard. There was a cracking sound. Tommy gave a firm grip on the crowbar and gave it a hard yank, leaning all his weight on it. With an ominous creaking sound like nails being pulled out of a crate, the coffin lid cracked open. Tommy looked back up at Hawes and handed him the crowbar. They stared at each other for a moment, and for a second, Hawes thought he wasn't going to do it. But then Tommy took a deep breath and bent down over the coffin once again. Slowly, as if he were searching for a buried treasure chest, Tommy slipped his fingers into the narrow crack beneath the coffin's lid. Tommy winced and bit down on his lower lip. He closed his eyes for a moment, then took another deep breath, and, with all of his strength, he pulled back on the lid, yanking it open. Lightning flashed, and Hawes almost screamed. The lightning flash had illuminated the horribly decomposing body, and the terrifying vision almost made Hawes lose his lunch and dinner, for that matter. The body's head was completely covered with a white sea of squirming, writhing maggots. The wind blew the disgusting stench right up into his face. Hawes clapped his hands to his nose and mouth, feeling his gorge rising. Tommy climbed up out of the grave. He turned and stared down into it at the cause of all of his madness, at the monster that had stalked his nightmares. His lips began to tremble. He started to feel dizzy. It was all coming back to him. He heard his sister screaming, "No, Tommy, no!" A much younger, much more frenzied version of himself. A child filled with raging hatred, bent on vengeance, driven to kill, screamed, "Die! Die! Kill it! Kill it!" His breath came fast. He looked around wildly and saw an old ruined wrought iron fence a short distance away. He started moving toward it like an automation. "Hey, where are you going?" Hawes said, thinking that they couldn't just leave things like this. They couldn't just leave the grave exposed. They had to cover it up again, or somebody might figure out who did it. Tommy grabbed one of the slim spear-like posts that made up the iron fence and pulled on it hard, working it loose. It finally gave and he pulled it out, then turned, heading purposefully back toward the open grave. Brandishing his weapon, Hawes came running up to him. "What's that for?" he said, frightened, not sure if he was frightened for his friend or frightened of him. "Tommy, what are you doing, boy?" Tommy went right past him, ignoring him. Hawes stared after him, open-mouthed, and suddenly, with shocking clarity, he saw what his friend was going to do, and he shook his head, refusing to believe it. No, he thought, Jesus, no, he's not gonna... Tommy had reached the grave, and he stood staring down at the rotten corpse inside it. his lips quivering with fury, his eyes wide open, white showing all around them. He raised the iron spear and leaped down into the grave, screaming, "You bastard!" He plunged the spear down with all of his might, driving it deep into the corpse's chest. It went in with a soft thumping, squishing sound. "Oh shit," said Hawes softly. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. Tommy had gone right off the deep end. What was he going to do now? Tommy yanked back on the spear, jerking it loose, then rammed it down again, then again, and again, and again. The force of the blows jarred the body, causing maggots to drop off the decomposing face. The insects scuttled away, looking for shelter, as Tommy attacked their grisly meal with mindless fury. Finally, his rage vented, Tommy rammed the spear down for the last time, driving it right through the corpse and feeling it stick into the wood of the coffin beneath it. His chest rose and fell as he tried to breathe. He climbed up out of the grave, feeling suddenly disoriented, sick to his stomach. It felt as if he had awakened from a horrifying dream, a night terror whose frightening images had lingered and superimposed themselves upon his waking vision. "Boy, he must have really messed you over," Hawes said, staring at him with astonishment. Tommy reached down and picked up the white hockey mask. He held it for a moment, staring down at it. The holes that were part of the mask design, meant to keep hockey goalies from sweating beneath, unventilated plastic, all seemed like evil little eyes staring back up at him. For a moment it seemed to him as if there actually were eyes behind the eye holes of this mask, the demented, bloodlust-crazed eyes of Jason Voorhees. He tossed the hockey mask down into the grave, then he bent down and uncapped the gas can. "You won't come back, Jason," he thought. "Not this time. You'll never come back again. It all ends right here. There's enough gasoline here to soak your rotted flesh through to the bone and turn you into one big torch. I'll give you hellfire, you murderous son of a bitch. I'll cook you until there's nothing left of you but cinders. Nothing. And then there won't be any nightmares anymore. I'll be free of you at last, purged by the flames." The sky suddenly lit up with lightning, and one of the jagged bolts lanced to earthward. The spear sticking up out of the corpse acted like a lightning rod, drawing the electricity, and sparks flew as the lightning struck the spear, missing Tommy Jarvis and Alan Hawes by inches as they leaped for cover. They didn't see the lightning travel down the length of the iron stake, impaling Jason through the heart. They didn't see it bathe the body. They didn't see the veins of electricity dancing over the corpse, crisscrossing it, writhing like snakes. They didn't see the decomposing eyelids suddenly flash open. Deep within the primitive, reptilian brain of Jason Voorhees, a twisted spark of bestial consciousness returned, ignited by electric fire. The feral eyes, uneaten by the teeming swarm of writhing maggots, as if the worms somehow knew something no one else could know, glowed as if red fires burned behind them. Sluggishly, thought processes revived, and ganglia squirmed with shock. Something lived again that had never really died completely. The inscription on the tombstone said, "At rest," but there was never any rest for Jason. Each time the tortured soul of Jason Voorhees was resurrected from the limbo it had fled to, it came back stronger, meaner, conscious only of the burning hate that had driven all reason from it. Hate for the people who had hurt it. Hate for everything that lived. It hated being denied the rest it longed for. It was like a wounded animal, attacking everything that came within its reach. It hated life, and so it worshipped death, romanced it as if death were a teasing lover who remained forever unattainable. And now it lived again. Tommy Jarvis and Alan Hawes uncovered their heads and got up from the ground, looking fearfully at the sky. That lightning had come very, very close, almost as if it were a punishment from God, thought Hawes. Maybe not a punishment, because we're still alive, but as if it were a warning. He wanted to listen to that warning, to grab Tommy and shake him by his shoulders, beg him to forget this craziness, plead with him to run back to the pickup truck and burn rubber all the way back to the damn highway. The hell with everything, thought Hawes. Leave everything just as it is. We've done enough. Let's just get out of here. But he couldn't bring himself to say it. He was too afraid. As much as he feared what was in that open grave, even more he feared losing Tommy as a friend. Tommy's friendship was the only thing he ever had that wasn't taken from him, and he treasured it as if it were a rare and fragile piece of porcelain, to be swaddled in soft cloth and kept close to the heart. You do things for your friends. Tommy went for the spear, fearful that it would attract more lightning before he finished what he had to do. It was still smoking from the blast. He touched it and quickly pulled his hand away. It was too hot. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a pair of gloves. He put them on and touched the spear again. It wasn't so hot that the gloves would not protect him. It felt only slightly warm now. He wrapped his fingers around the spear and pulled, but he had driven it in so deeply that now it wouldn't budge. That wouldn't do. He couldn't chance another bolt of lightning nearly frying him. It would be far too dangerous. He had to finish this thing. He couldn't give up now. He jumped down into the open grave. He grabbed the spear again and started straining to remove it. Hawes leaned down and spoke in a low, shaky voice, almost a whisper. "Let's just get the hell out of here," he pleaded, risking his friend's anger. "My heart can't take any more of this." Tommy ignored him, still straining to remove the spear, unaware that the corpse's eyes were open, staring at him with loathing. He gave a grunt and yanked hard at the spear. It pulled loose and he tossed it up out of the grave. Now he could finish what he started. He pulled off his leather gloves, not wanting to get them soaked with gas, and tossed them up to Hawes. He started to climb up out of the grave. The corpse suddenly sprang up as if catapulted from the coffin. Powerful arms seized him. Hawes screamed and kept on screaming. The thing was dead! Dead! It couldn't possibly be alive. It was a rotted, moldering pile of meat, and it had leaped up and grabbed his friend. Still screaming, Hawes started to run. Tommy panicked in fear, tripled his adrenaline through his body as he fought to get away from the rotting corpse that held him in an iron grip and tried to force him back down into the open grave. He managed to pull loose and kick the thing back down into the coffin, and then he scrambled out, clawing at the earth, every nerve in his body screaming at him to flee, but even as one part of his mind urged him to run in terror from the unacceptable reality, another part of him, the part that fed on hate, overwhelmed the panic, cursing through him and screamed, "Kill it! Kill it now! Send it back to where it came from! Burn the goddamn thing!" He scrambled for the can of gasoline and wrenched the cap off. He turned around, clutching the red metal container, and saw the corpse rising from its grave. With desperation, he flung the can around, splashing gas on the thing, thinking at least the gasoline would burn the creature's eyes if the rain didn't wash it off, but still it kept on coming. He dropped the empty gas can and backed away, wildly pawing for the matches, as the thunder crashed and then the rain kept coming. It poured down in sheets, drenching him and soaking the matches. The thing that was Jason Voorhees came at him, eyes burning with hate. The downpour that just started getting heavier, washing maggots off of his rotting flesh. Tommy tried to strike a light, but the matches had been quickly soaked and it was hopeless. He looked up, eyes bulging from their sockets, and the living corpse was simply standing there, as if mocking him, staring at him with the ravening gaze of a hungry animal. It started to come toward him. In an agony of desperation, unable to accept the fact that the wet matches wouldn't light, Tommy Jarvis struck one useless match after another as Jason slowly came closer and closer. And then Hawes appeared from nowhere, brandishing a shovel, screaming hoarsely, swinging it like a pickaxe and bringing it down with all of his strength on Jason's head. No one was going to hurt his only friend, not even a fiend from hell. The blow didn't even faze the creature. Jason whipped around, moving with blinding speed, and his arm lashed out at Hawes, fingers hooked like claws. The hand plunged into the chest of Alan Hawes with such incredible force that it went all the way through his entire body, ripping through flesh as if it were only tissue paper, rending sinew, smashing bone, emerging from the back clutching its prize, the still beating heart of Alan Hawes. Jason yanked his arm back, and the body that had once been Alan Hawes fell back, collapsing like a deflated balloon, falling back into the open grave. It landed in the coffin, and the impact jarred the lid loose, and it came crashing down, slamming shut the door of the last cell that would ever hold him. Tommy's nerve broke, and he ran. Seeing Tommy fleeing, Jason quickly looked around, searching for a weapon, driven by an insatiable need to kill before his victim got away. His gaze fell on the iron spear. He bent down to pick it up, and then something in the open grave caught his attention. Tommy fled in blind panic, slipping in the mud, the rain coming down in buckets and soaking him clear to the skin. He reached the pickup truck and wrenched open the door, leaped inside, and fumbled for the ignition. The big engine roared to life, and Tommy mashed the accelerator to the floor. The tires spun, found traction, and the pickup slewed around, gaining speed as it hurtled toward the cemetery gates. Jason had forgotten about his victim for the moment. The creature that had once been a frightened boy, huddling in the woods like some abused animal, had spotted something that struck a familiar chord. Something registered as mine, inside that twisted brain of his. Jason pulled on the gloves that had belonged to Tommy Jarvis, dropped by Hawes in his hysterical flight. He reached down into the grave and picked up the object, handling it with reverence. The white hockey mask had been washed clean by the pouring rain, and beneath the persistent flashes of lightning, it gave off an unearthly glow. As if following a ritual, Jason Voorhees slowly donned the hockey mask. He turned away from the open grave, from the closed coffin that now held the torn and broken body of what had once been Alan Hawes, and still holding the iron spear, the alchemist rod that had brought him back to life, Jason started walking toward the cemetery gates. Just as something had been pulling Tommy Jarvis back to the Eternal Rest Cemetery, so something now pulled at Jason Voorhees, something that urged him to follow a blind homing instinct and return to the place where it all started. A voice inside his mind came back to life, commanding him to go back to Crystal Lake and kill again. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been Chapter 1 of Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. This has always been one of my favorite scenes from the movies, the whole resurrection of Jason. It's the end of the human Jason saga and the very beginning of the zombie Jason saga. You know, this is where the whole undead thing begins. So I really enjoyed Simon Hawke's rendition of that scene. It played out a little bit differently than in the movie, but for the most part, it's what we come to expect from that scene after we've seen the movie as many times as we have, or at least as many times as I have. There's not really a whole lot more I can say about tonight's chapter. I'm looking forward to the rest of the book. I definitely like Simon Hawke's writing style, and yeah, I'm excited about jumping back into this one as soon as possible. I wanted to make at least a 2 or 3 chapter upload for you guys tonight, but I've got some personal medical things going on. I'm not going to bore you with the details, but I at least wanted to get out a chapter to you guys. You already had to wait over the weekend. I dropped that teaser of the prologue on Friday. Haven't done nothing since then. I wanted to at least get this chapter out to you guys tonight, and I promise I'll be back by at least Wednesday this week with some more of Jason Lives. And remember, tonight's upload was brought to you by our patrons over on the Patreon page: Carl Eakins, Catherine McClear, Sean Campbell, Cecilia Spears in Hawaii. Guys, for as low as $2 to $5 per month, you can become a patron of the channel, get some awesome early content, and some great rewards for being a patron. The future of the channel really does land on the shoulders of the people who sign up on the Patreon page. I got to depend on that going forward because YouTube will not allow me to monetize the videos. Any ad revenue has to go to the copyright holders, like New Line Cinema, for instance. So if you would like to help keep the channel going and you enjoy the content here, then check out the link in the description below for the Patreon page. I will see you guys at least by Wednesday with more of this great book. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, have a great night, I'll see you next time.